Hello and welcome into the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Kind of an abrupt way to start this program as I was trying to figure some things out here along as we go. Episode 2 of the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. I am Jamie Horton. I'll be hosting most of these as we kind of go throughout these things and again kind of remind you about the content that we're going to be providing you. It's an educational show where we talk a lot of hoop. And we talk about analytics, and we talk about the world of analytics and how analytics can help each and every one of us not only help you become better players, better coaches, better organizations, better athletes, but certainly it improves the game of basketball. At least we believe that it makes the game of basketball better. Be joined in just a moment by a friend, colleague, and the COO of EPLAY University, Joseph Gill. He joins us now. Joseph, can I call you Joseph or can I call you Joe? Are we on that kind of, what level are we?
Either one. Numbers tell your story, right? So my name's not that important.
I prefer Joe. It's just easier, and it's one that I'm familiar with. So we're going to go with Joe. Before we kind of get started, Joe, it's a weird time. The year 2020 it's been a gut punch. We're about a third of the way through it almost, and here we are talking to each other long distance. This is how everybody's doing it now because of coronavirus. And so before we get started, how are you managing? How's your family? How are folks where you are up in Minnesota?
We're all safe and sound up here, and I'm blessed that Minnesotans are naturally very social distancing people. So our state, I believe, last time I checked, has the lowest amount of corona per capita in the United States. But I mean, my heart just goes out to everybody who's affected by this, and I can not to turn it back to me for my selfish reasons, but my bottom line's been affected by this. Everybody else surely has too, and that's going to continue to hit in waves as we figure out what the basketball world looks like, for 2020, 2021, 2022 and beyond. So, I hope everybody else, and I hope you as well as your family are safe and sound. But yeah, trying times, not a lot of fun.
Trying and certainly it's weird. I miss sports. I miss basketball. I miss my friends. I was telling Eric Strickland the other day that this kind of puts a lot of stuff into perspective. One of the first things I did was apologize to a bunch of friends for flaking out on them so many times in the past, and like, hey, you guys asked me to go out when this thing's over with. I'll be there. I'll be there this time, and I won't flake out on you. But I appreciate you joining us. I'm glad to hear that everything's going well up in Minnesota. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Again, COO, EPLAY University, Joseph Gill. Let's educate the folks on analytics. So let's talk about your background just a little bit. Who you are, where you come from, what do you do, what got you here?
So basically the best way I can describe my background is that, I was just good enough as a player to creep into the upper echelons and understand, from the last guy on the bench role, what kind of goes into a lot of the stuff behind the scenes in basketball. And, I was very blessed. I played at a high school up here in Minnesota that was, on an incredible run when I was there. We had, numerous D1 prospects in my class alone. 3 of my buddies got drafted into the G League that were in my graduating class. 4 of them ended up going D1. I played a very marginal role in that team. I had a lot of injuries even back in high school. Then I went off to a couple of D3 schools up here in Minnesota, Bethel University, University of St. Thomas. But my basketball career was really, yeah, there we go. There's that fat guy with that knee brace with his hand way too high up on the basketball. But I kind of realized around the time this picture was actually taken that it was probably never going to be what I wanted to be as far as my career went. And I always loved the game, and I wanted to stay around it. And so I kind of went off in this roundabout way of falling butt backwards into analytics, where for a while I wanted to be a scout, and then I wanted to be a high school coach, and then I've always been mathematically inclined. I remember reading my first analytics book when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I believe, Baseball Between the Numbers by the Baseball Prospectus. Nate Silver, I believe James Click is now the GM of the Astros, or some of the guys in that book. And I never really understood that basketball analytics was a thing until I started having these injuries pile up, and I started reading up on them. And at first, it's funny, is my path towards analytics was weird in the sense where, like, I was always mathematically inclined, but I love basketball. I didn't want to believe that it could be statistically quantified to the way that people were claiming that it could be. So I actually got into analytics because I tried to disprove analytics using math, which is pretty hard. It's impossible, actually. Disproving math using math is is called a theorem, I believe, and they're used as proofs that to make sure that the math is all airtight.
Matt Damon was in a great documentary about math in '96. I don't know if you saw Good Will Hunting. Is a really good documentary.
I think I'm familiar. I hope that I can be half as handsome, but have twice as high paying a job as a janitor one day. Yeah, right. But yeah, so it's interesting because once my career was over, I bounced around. I spent 3 years at 2 different schools and played in a total of 3 college games. And then after that, I transferred to the University of Minnesota. And when I was there, I couldn't let it go. I want to stay around the game. And late one night, I had an idea for how NBA teams might be playing the final 10 seconds of games wrong. And literally that one idea turned into an 800-hour project that pulled 6 years worth of cumulative data. And then, after I was done with it, my theorem was actually proved correct by the win probability calculator that I built. I'll never claim to be the most mathematically inclined guy or mathematically gifted guy in this space, but I know enough where the numbers work for me when I put them into the rows and in the columns. But anyway, so from that point, I tried to course go about selling that project. That went about as well as it normally goes for most people, and I got pretty jaded by my perceptions of how the NBA was actually run, and at the point where I was kind of getting very upset with how this all was working, kind of wondering, why are these teams not, playing in the way that the numbers say that they should, and why are these people so interested in getting my resume but not interested in following up? I got sick of it, and I reached out to my network in kind of a Hail Mary, and I was like, this is what I've been doing these last 18 months since I was done playing. I'd really appreciate if anybody had anything that they thought could pertain to me. And it's interesting because actually a former AAU coach reached out to me, and he had a player that he was mentoring at that time, and this player was a lottery pick, and I started working with him, and it went all right, and then I got another client through him, and that one went spectacular, and I kind of realized there was a market for working directly with players, and years later I just never looked back. It just kept snowballing, and I'm very blessed to feel that it worked out the way that it did.
Well, how do you feel about the crunch time stat now? I love this that how you got into this and what you did. Give me a little bit. I want to learn a little bit more about that, because as a fan, I get frustrated watching my team fumble things away in crunch time, as it's known. So what kind of did you find out?
So unfortunately, I can't exactly. That project, I actually don't own 100% of it, and so I can't. Yeah, so I can't even disclose if I want to, and it's tough. Where analytics is an information economy, so my 800 hours that I invested into it, jump-started my career. It's going to the down payment of my career, but I'm also aware of the fact that if I just disclose into a public forum, what my findings were, then I'm opening the door for copycats, and not to get into like the business side of EPLAY, and all this, but I do retain my own company, Mercenary Analytics, where I do other unrelated things to EPLAY. And I can put it this way: when I'm pitching a player, and they ask me, like, "What's your experience?" and I'm able to bring up the findings for the report, I normally get their attention. They're normally very intrigued by what I have to offer from there, and I normally get the client at that point. So, but I share the same frustration, and I've sat. I remember a meeting that I had in particular where the guy that I was meeting with was a friend of mine working for a team, and at the end of the meeting, about an hour and a half of poring over my spreadsheets and just picking apart my process, he told me literally, like, I like this idea makes sense in my brain. Your math checks out. I like you. You're good at what you do. We're never going to do this. And I was like, wait, what? What was that last part? I've got a lot of respect for this guy because he kind of pulled the curtain back and was like, hey, here's how the sausage is really made, and that made my decision to go independent a lot easier. But in that moment, it was shocking to hear him break down exactly why they were willing, his team was willing to buy it, but why they were never going to use it, and why, it was the way that it was. And, I kind of took that step back, and I realized, like, well, if teams don't want to buy this, well, who will? And so I started working for them, the people who would.
Again, visiting with Joseph Gill on the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. He's the COO of EPLAY University. Joe, let's talk about your time at St. Thomas University.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Worked under Coach John Tower, PhD psychologist, right? What was that like? What can you obtain from a coach and a mentor that's like a psychologist, and how do you kind of take that into the avenue of analytics in your career now?
I've known Coach Tower now for about a decade of my life, between when he recruited me, when he recruited me twice. He recruited me out of high school, and then he recruited me from college to college. And then he was my coach, obviously, and ran the program, and then I couldn't play for him, and he stayed in touch, and then I worked for him at his camps, and then I worked for him, in a basketball capacity as his analytics guy. And it's very hard to describe somebody who's so brilliant in one sentence, because I in fact encourage anybody listening to this that's interested in this. Coach Tower has actually been profiled in the New York Times, because he's one of, I think, two coaches in all of the NCAA basketball who teaches a course at the school that he's head coach at. He's such a caring and smart gentleman, and it's also tough because it's a weird dynamic where everybody knows he has a PhD in psychology. Everyone knows he's brilliant, and so there's almost this weird baseline of fear where it's he's your head coach and you love him and he cares about you, but also you're afraid to divulge a little bit too much in your sentences when you're a freshman and a sophomore. And so it's been definitely one of those relationships where I think about it in many different stages. And I think I was about 21 years old, where I was I was blessed, even going back to high school, where I got to work under, not work, but I got to learn under Jim Peterson, longtime Rocket, now with the Wolves and their play-by-play, who he played, I think, 8 years in the NBA. He had a stepson who was my age, who was on the team. And I was also blessed where I got to learn from Don Zierden, who was a longtime NBA assistant coach and coach of the Minnesota Lynx in the WNBA, because his son was on the team. So I got to learn from those guys and the X's and O's, and I got to learn from Coach Tower, and I got to just sponge everything that he did, and how he went about communicating his ideas to the players, and how he won them over, and then, it's also great where you get to then go to the guy later in your life and be like, okay, what exactly were you doing here? When you worded it, when you communicate these ideas in this way, I guess, the guy is, he's a wonderful person. He's also an incredible basketball coach. He pulls a lot of rabbits out of the hat, in the sense where, I've been in meetings with him where he's been fretting about, do we have enough shooting this year? Do we have enough defense this year? And he finds ways to get the absolute most out of players in a way that I think, most coaches, and the coaches I've for sure played under, would have no idea to get, how to get to that level of buy-in. And so learning how to, I'm a big guy in incorporating, psychological principles into, how you win people over with analytics, because, there's a great way to go about it, and there's a bad way to go about it. If you go about it and you're trying to manipulate people, and they feel like you're a bad faith actor and that you don't actually care about them, you just care about the numbers, you've lost them. And frankly, I would never blame anybody for wanting to cut someone like that out of their life. If you go about it in a way where it's, this might be a tougher pill for you to swallow, than I would hope, but I care about you, and I want the best for you, and I'm willing to to show that, and we can align our incentives. That's a great way to communicate with people. That's an altruistic way of communicating with people, and I think that's what analytics needs more of. And so being able to learn at the feet of a master for that for so many years in different capacities has been frankly invaluable. I don't think that I would have ever gotten even off the ground if I wasn't able to learn these things from him, because when I first got my first NBA client, I was living in Mankato, Minnesota, in a $720 apartment that I had a roommate for, and I'd played so much 2K, and I'd played in big games myself as a player, and I had friends who played in big games, but it hits different when it's your advice that's going to be used by an NBA player to make his money in an NBA game. And I remember watching that first game, and I was so confident going into it, and then the tip-off comes, and I'm like, oh my god, I have to throw up. I am literally going to throw up watching this. And it was that moment of it was a leap of faith, and what have I done? And then it turned out all right, but there were moments in those first couple months where working with this player, and it was not completely new to me, but this aspect of the work was new to me. Where I leaned heavily on what I was able to learn from Coach Tower, and just having a conversation with somebody, and winning them over, and making them believe that that this is a useful thing, even if you've never been told it's useful, until now.
Again, visiting with Joseph Gill, Joe Gill, COO of EPLAY University, visiting with us here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. As we sort of, again, part of the idea behind this content that we're providing you guys is to educate you on analytics, why they're applied, how they're applied, and why we believe so strongly in them. And I think first and foremost, as basketball fans, we believe analytics makes the game better. We believe it makes better players, and it
Undoubtedly.
ultimately makes players better, and that game becomes better. So I want to see the best product I can each and every time these players step on the floor. So Joseph helps us do that. He helps us learn how these things work. And in talking about your tutelage under Coach Tower, you talked about the communication aspect, and you're learning from a PhD in psychology. And that kind of talks about how analytics are up here, Joe, and players are catching up to them. Like, we're trying to bring that world, people to the understanding of why these things are important and can help you improve your game, become a better athlete, and ultimately get you paid, right?
Right.
Why are players behind? How have we failed in delivering this message, man?
Well, I mean, and not to push back on that, but I honestly struggle to see a way that players couldn't be behind. Because realistically speaking, I mean, you talk about the investment that ownership makes into these numbers, at least at their beginning, in that, even if it was like a $10,000, $50,000 investment, that was something that would have seemed daffy to any player in the early 2000s to spend their own money, to hire somebody to check out theoretical possibilities, to check out stuff that, wasn't even proven to have a return. And I think that ownership has kind of realized that, they made that small initial investment. They built this culture where analytics professionals believe that, they should give their work away for free, and that they should work for free to prove their worth. And then, eventually they can become, a valued member and a salaried member of the team. And, while ownership was kind of cultivating this nice little passive thing on the back end where they get all this, this free labor, players were kind of kept in the dark. And, in many ways, players were dissuaded from talking with analytics guys from people within their organization. And, I think it's pretty crazy. I mean, there's still teams in the NBA where, their entire management team, from their front office through their coaches, probably don't value analytics. But yet, the owner still understands that, they can badmouth it all they want behind the scenes, but we're going to use this stuff to help us make informed decisions. And, I think there's, honestly, we could probably do a 5-part series on how I feel players, perceive analytics, and how, different people, either cultivate that feeling, or try to fight against it, and why they do so. But, I think it kind of comes down to, a lot of the people who are in with players kind of understand that, I need to be so valuable to the player thinks that they can't live without me, but I also can't bring in somebody who brings potentially more value than me. And that's a pretty selfish way of thinking, but that's just self-preservation. And, I think that, from when players are 10, 11, 12 years old, they hear all these things about analytics. They hear that analytics are, they're BS, and that, they're broken, they're stupid, and they're pointless, and no one should ever believe in them. And they're hearing it from people who are all-time greats, even on their television. And, that's a tough conditioning to fight against in the analyst community. But, I've definitely tried, and gone through great lengths to try to figure out exactly how I'm going to present analytics to these players, and we'll let them understand, dude, analytics, your experiences with analytics before meeting me are probably not great. Your experiences are probably limited to people bad-mouthing them, either to your face or media, and then also people coming in your Twitter mentions and your Instagram telling you about why why you suck because of analytics. And, if there's one thing that I believe, is that anybody who's being paid $2 million is one of 450 people in the world who are at the top of a sport that's played by literally hundreds of millions of people. They don't suck. No one in the NBA, no one in the history of the NBA has ever sucked at basketball. In fact, the person that is the worst player in the NBA, if he showed up at your rec league gym, you would literally not be able to stop him from scoring every time he touched the ball. So I think there's just all these factors that play against analytics, and there's a lot of people who are invested in keeping analytics away from the players. And I was on a pitch yesterday with two guys in the NBA, and I'm talking to them about their numbers, and I'm telling them, hey man, did you know that you're great at this? You are literally, by the numbers, you are, for one of the players that said you're better than 95 out of 100 guys, at this, for every single 100 guys, you're better than 95 of them on average at this thing. The other player I said, for every single 100 guys, you're better than 98 of them, for the skill set. And both of the guys were like, I've never heard this before. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason why, because, if you hadn't heard this before, then you have questions. And, if someone's not doing a good job in your circle, be it your coach, your GM, or your agents, they're not going to want to know that you know these things. They're going to try and keep you in the dark, and it's complex, but, I think players are definitely waking up, and, for every single positive, encounter I have, I view it as giving it back tenfold, where, I was also, it was nice where I could literally tell one of the players in the call yesterday, I'm like, dude, your teammate on your team has worked with me before, and he's gonna say great things about me. You should text him about me right now. And that's something that I've cultivated now over the years, where I feel comfortable, telling anybody that has a fleeting connection with one of the guys I've worked with, be like, dude, ask him about me, ask him about how he feels about analytics that have worked with me. He's probably gonna tell you great things.
That said, I mean, look, for so many years we've heard that analytics have been used against players, right? You mentioned it. People come into your social media and they'll throw maybe a couple of categories at you where they leave out. It's kind of politics, right? They leave out the meat and potatoes of things, and then they just kind of throw you that the one little morsel that they're going to make you think, oh man, you're right. I'm not good because of this thing that you're presenting me. It's been used against players for forever. Who stands to benefit now the most? Is it because I think there's a case to be made that front offices, organizations that build with analytics as well, team building, everything else. But who stands to benefit the most?
It's players, and it's not even close. I mean, you think about the NBA, you think about Division I teams. We got 383 entities just in that realm. Not even talking about overseas leagues or G League teams. Those are entities that are going to make money regardless. Every single NBA team, doesn't matter how they try to cook their books, how they try to get creative with depreciating assets, and licensing agreements. They're all making a ton of money. That was one of the barriers I ran into, is that it was kind of like, why would we embrace your radical late game strategy if we're going to make money regardless? And I'm like, I don't have a recourse to that. I can't convince you otherwise. But like a player, I always tell a lot of the guys I work with, and a lot of the guys that I work with are the players who stand to benefit the most out of the players. The guys on the fringe of the NBA who are looking at maybe a 3 or 4 year NBA career, or potentially if they make some nice but realistic gains, a 10 to 12 year NBA career. If you think about like the difference between somebody who's paid in the 40th percentile for the NBA, that's roughly a minimum contract. Someone who's paid in the 80th percentile in the NBA, that's 8 figures a year. The difference between those two players, when you get into like the nitty gritty of it, and I always use the example of like, somebody who makes 32% of their 3-pointers is someone that you do not want your team taking 3-pointers. Somebody who makes 38% of their 3-pointers, someone that you hope takes a ton of 3-pointers. And the difference between those two shots is one goes in every single, 17 times more often than the other. One made shot every single 17 attempts. That is how small the margins are in this game. Anything that you can do to increase those margins. And you think about guys who shoot 32%, most of them are minimum contract guys who shoot 38%. If they've got other skill sets and they can defend, all of a sudden you're looking at them like they're starters. And, the economic implications of that are massive. I can't undersell it, and I can't possibly undersell it,
Yeah, I guess you call it now where people talk about roles, or you have a specific role. Role players are getting $10-15 million a year now in basketball. If you're a role
right.
man, if you're a role man or a guy that's 3-and-D, you hear about I need a 3-and-D wing. Those guys are invaluable. The ones that fit into these systems. Again, visiting with Joseph Gill. I call Joe Gill. I'm going to call you Joe. It's Joe Gill, COO of EPLAY University. We'll get to, as we kind of move through this, we're going to let you know how you can learn more about EPLAY U. And learn more about what Joe does as well. But he's with us here on the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Joe, Moneyball. People talk about this all the time. I know you've probably been peppered with Moneyball, right?
I love it. I mean,
I do too. And
I'm a huge Michael Lewis fan. I joke that I'm like an informal Michael Lewis book club where I'm constantly recommending Michael Lewis books to my clients and my friends. Who's like, I think that they're all like just fantastic.
You look at the Oakland Athletics, and I love baseball. I love analytics. Baseball and sabermetric, those sorts of things are what kind of got me into the numbers behind sports. If I was to tell you that, hey, I could get you to the playoffs, at least to the playoffs, to the dance, 12 out of 19 years, something like that, I think the Oakland Athletics, a small market team, after implementing this system of how they team build, have been to the playoffs as one of the more consistent franchises, especially as a small market team, for 2 decades. And baseball, the Puritan game that it is slow to catch up to almost everything. Why are they so far behind when you've actually seen a team have so much success with it and done it right in your face? They're saying, here's how we did it. Why aren't you guys?
You asked me this question at the right time because as part of one of the bigger, and these aren't ready for market yet, but we're hopeful at EPLAY and EPLAY that they'll be hitting the market pretty soon. But one of the lecture series that I'm developing for them, it has an extensive chapter on baseball because if you don't think that you can learn from other aspects of life and make it pertain to what you need to get the most value out of in your life. Your ability to learn is almost nothing. And so, I think that basketball, even though it's such a different game, like I could talk for 10 minutes about how different basketball is from baseball. And I could even start with I used to love watching baseball growing up, and I don't think I've watched a full game in 3 or 4 years now because it just doesn't hold my interest anymore. And I'll sit down and I'll watch film for clients for 9 hours a day, and then I'll sit down and I'll watch, the 7th seed in the West play the 6th seed in the East, just for my own amusement and leisure because I love the game so much. But baseball is such a fascinating case because it's a sport that is, and so many purists will claim that it's more complex, but it's pretty simple. It's linear. Let's put it that way. There is a set amount of outcomes that can happen from any one thing in the field, and of course those outcomes can snowball. And then all of a sudden you become, it becomes less and less likely, and wonky things can happen. The air can be let out of the tires that way. But so much of baseball's misery, as far as statistics can go, can be traced back to the formation of the game and in the 1860s, 1870s, where the game was so radically different. But yet, I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name, Henry Chadwick. Henry Chadwick was the first great mass media baseball person. He was a writer about the game. He helped grow the game. He was massively influential in a time where there was no radio, there was no television, so people couldn't watch a game. They'd either went to the game in person or they read about it. And so Chadwick was the first great writer of the game, and he had the ear of the nation in that regard. And the game back then was so air-filled that Chadwick, he tried to figure out the best way to show who was the most skilled batsman. Because there were so many errors and there were so few walks at that period for another number of reasons I could spend 10 minutes talking about, that the art of the skillful hit was the big topic of the day. And after a few years of trying to figure out the best offensive statistics, all of a sudden batting average wins out. And the rules of baseball change. Players become better over time. They become smarter. The equipment changes. Just pretty much everything changes, and yet batting average persists as the great statistic to show the art of the skillful hit. And it goes to show. And I always talk about in basketball, there's 2 different ways to view performance. There's production based, and then there's the skill threshold of it all. And I always say I'll never fault anybody who watches Carmelo Anthony he's the greatest, because what Carmelo Anthony does on the basketball court is incredible. He takes some of the most difficult shots and he makes them at a rate that's higher than almost anybody else possibly could. The unfortunate aspect is that would you rather have Carmelo Anthony make 45% of his mid-range shots? Would you rather have Robbie Hummel make 35% of his threes? There's an argument that for different times and places, one is more valuable than the other, but the prevailing, PPP, points per possession of it, is that Robbie Hummel's three-pointer is worth almost 20% more as far as an average point, return than Carmelo's mid-range. And I'm not here to get bogged down in that old discussion. I've written literally thousands and thousands and thousands of words for different publications about the mid-range versus everything else. But
I have a question about that before we're done too, about the mid-range.
Oh, please!
I think, and I think it goes to this discussion because I know that you work with individuals, you work with athletes, you work with players.
Right.
Whereas I think sometimes analytics has gotten used in the wrong sense, right? So I think one small aspect that you could say is the way the game has changed from a team perspective. More possessions equals more shots. Shooting more threes, and I hit 38% of them. That's still a good chance of it's still one more point than a 2 on the other end, right? So if you hit more of those, but the disappearance of the art of the mid-range game, is something that I think that we don't see. Maybe does the application of analytics in the wrong way hurt some of that aspect of the game?
It's hard, and this is going to potentially upset people. When I'm going to preface this by saying that when you showed those pictures of me, you pulled up a picture of me taking a jump shot. That was a mid-range shot. When I was a player, I made them. I remember when I was 15 and AAU practice, coach, that one right there. Look at that fat guy. I I had a coach when I hit a mid-range jumper tell me, he literally stopped the entire practice, said, "Oh, the mid-range is dying, and I'm so happy that you're making mid-range shots." And there's kind of a mythology around it where, like when Jordan and Kobe dominated, and even Kareem, if you want to count a skyhook as a mid-range shot, which it is a shot that originates in the mid-range, so it is kind of a mid-range, if not 100% a mid-range shot. It is, it's at least a neighboring facet of the game. For so long, guys dominated the mid-range, and the best scorers were mid-range guys. And it's kind of a romantic thing where when I was a kid, it's funny. I grew up in a town of 1,800 people in Minnesota, and before I transferred to that great high school I played at, my hero was John Lure, because he was a guy from the same town who made it to first Wisconsin, then to the NBA. But at the same time, instead of looking at a guy who looked like me and came from the same place that I did, I wanted to play Kobe Bryant because, Kobe was the best scorer in the game. And I'm like, Kobe's hitting these 12, the 14-foot fadeaway double clutch shots. If I want to play in college, I got to hit them too. So, I always joke with people, I got the nastiest mid-range game out of any analytics guy you'll see, because I dumped hundreds of hours in a driveway to try to be just like those guys. But I always bring it back to my guys where I'm like, you can either be the dude that people, talk about glowingly for your mid-range shots and make $10 million. You can be the guy who makes 12 times that. What I always use to kind of point out this to people is that, everyone remembers Josh Smith. Josh Smith, of course, a very athletic power forward. He could dribble the ball a little bit. He was very powerful. He was big. He in a lot of ways had a body similar to LeBron James. But he couldn't shoot three-pointers. And everybody remembers how they felt when Josh Smith, a career 28.5% three-point shooter, took a three. It ended his entire career, basically. He shot his way out of the league because he couldn't stop taking them. And I remember, so what I do is I take 28.5, I round it up to 30. A 30% three-pointer is a 0.90 points per possession shot. And then I ask myself, how many guys in the NBA over the course of the season last year took a decent amount of mid-range shots at like, 1 or 2 per game and scored at higher than the Josh Smith bar, which for mid-range is 45%. 45% mid-range shot is equivalent to a 30% three-pointer over a large sample. And, every single year, it's just a handful of guys. It's the best shooters in the NBA. It's something like, I think 3 years ago, there were 11 guys out of 450 that was able to eclipse just that bar. And only one of them, I believe, at that point actually scored above 1 point per possession, which is the average offense in the NBA. And, I'm not here to have a conversation about, every single potential situation you can find yourself in with the shot clock, or offensive scoring. But it is pretty remarkable that, the top 11 players in the NBA at the mid-range scored about the rate of one of the worst three-point shooters of all time, the guy who literally shot his way out of the league. There's some psychological aspects to why we remember the Josh Smith three-pointer as being worse than the Damian Lillard mid-range shot. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You get paid off of your production, and if your production is lower than what it is, you get paid less.
COO of EPLAY U, Joe Gill, visiting with us here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. That kind of brings us into another topic. You mentioned Josh Smith. I thought some of the most success, or about one of the best little times that he had in the NBA, was when he went to the Houston Rockets there at the end of his career. They had some nice run there, and that's a analytics that's a team that embraces the analytics, right? They're into the analytics.
More than any other team in the NBA, almost to a point of being too predictable with their analytical approach at times. But at the end of the day, they're how many years has it been since they haven't made the playoffs?
Did that have any did that have any reason, do you think, into the success of Josh Smith there with the Rockets there at the end of his career? Do you think?
I bring it back to one of the things I always tell my prospective clients in the pitch is that I can't tell you the history of your game better than you can. You're going to be able to tell me stories from when you're in 7th and 6th grade. It was a tie game. You're playing in that back gym of your future high school, and the coach always had to play for you, and you cross go over going right to left. You had a step back 17-footer, the shot drops, and everybody explodes. That's when you knew you loved the game. But I can tell you, now you're 25 years old, that you make that shot at exactly 32%. I can tell you more about the outcomes of your game. You can tell me more about the history of your game. The oral history of your game doesn't get you paid. The outcomes of your game do. And so, it's one of those things where I found that players have a general idea of themselves. How could you not? But also, it's very hard to be a completely objective critic of yourself. Most people either are too critical or not critical enough. We're talking right now about players who have, like there's nothing that makes me more upset when people talk about, oh, he's so arrogant. It's like, yeah, he's 24 years old and he's worth $40 million. How would you feel? Like how would any of us feel if we were that young and we had that much money? I call it the righteous ego, because they're not wrong. They think they're the crap. They're not wrong at all. They if you're the one who's in the wrong, you think they're not the crap. But it's tough because what I do is I try to inform players about themselves. At the end of the day, that's what analytics is. It's just information. And guys can push back if they want to, but with every single shot that's added to the sample, my confidence in the sample grows. And what I have to believe kind of played in that success with the Rockets is, and Josh couldn't completely cut his bad habits, but the Rockets probably figured out the best way to utilize him, because the Hawks couldn't do it, the Pistons clearly could not do it. The Rockets probably went in with a more nuanced approach, and they got a little bit more out of it. It's unfortunate that he still bombed as much as he did from three, but there's that famous game, I think it was Game 7, where the Clippers were up. Maybe it was Game 6, where the Clippers were up something like 15 points in 4 minutes to go, and then Josh Smith goes on the single greatest stretch of his career, and they end up winning that series and advancing to the playoffs. I talk with some guys in the Rockets, and it just seems like the Rockets just know what they have. If regardless of what's going on in the front office or with the ownership, the Rockets as a basketball organization are well-oiled machine where they understand what they have and how to put their guys in great spots. And so I think that's I think that is the secret sauce to their success, is a nuanced, informative approach.
Joe Gill visiting with us here, the ePlay Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. He's the COO of EPLAY University. We'll finish off our show by giving you some information on ePlay U and how you can go and learn more. But I did want to ask you this again. This is part of the problem that we face, not only as our company, but I know it's something that you have faced on your side and dealing with analytics. Is that, look, Joe, you know this. You're on social media. There's a social media culture right now around basketball that's called the "only hoopers know" culture. That drives me a little crazy sometimes, because some things you hear are really outlandish, to say the least. How do you? What's your opinion on the guys who bash analytics, the ones that you can't seem to talk basketball with for any length of time without them telling you how just it's the worst thing that's ever happened, and it doesn't make sense, and it's stupid, and it doesn't mean anything?
Well, I mean, and I could bring up some examples from my personal life, because I found that generally those guys and I have more in common than I do with the average fan. Most of those guys who say that stuff played at a high level. They played at a higher level than I did. They had more success than I did. If I'm the one who's going to come in there and be like, I'm going to change their mind about how they view this thing that they know on a deep level, and they leverage that knowledge to have great personal success in their lives, maybe I need to examine where I'm coming from. And it's one of those things, like I can make concessions and I can make caveats, but the numbers are kind of what they are at a certain point. And I've found that the guys. And I get tangled up in a lot of those real hoopers know conversations at times on Twitter, and more often than not, I agree with the guys who are saying real hoopers know. It doesn't have to be a complete signing off on everything that they do, but it's funny. I'm wearing there's a guy that gets a lot of flack for like he doesn't use analytics much in his expertise, but I'm actually wearing a shirt from Rashad Phillips right now. He's one of my good friends. I've had many conversations with him about analytics. He understands it. He won't ever make his own spreadsheets, but he's got his own databases. He knows.
I'm probably referring to a Karl Malone post I saw the other day, but that's neither here nor there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and that was not Rashad. That was somebody else. But I found that a lot of those guys that are out there talking about analytics, like they like. They have numbers that are within their wheelhouse. They're like, yeah, I see the value in that. Like, there's a guy that like openly jokes about how I'm, an analytics guy. I've handed him synergy profiles before, and he reads them and he understands everything in them. But it's that thing where I think a lot of those guys get exacerbated because for decades now they've been told that their experiences and their and all the film they've watched over the years and everything that they've done on the court is worthless because of one number. On the flip side of that is you have a lot of guys who are pretenders in that space, who are pretending like they put in the work and they cared so much and that their eyes are better than everybody else's. And it's like, no, you're just riding their argument and you're trying to, to pull these people in who actually know what they're talking about onto your side when you know nothing about what you're talking about. And those are the people that I've generally not enjoyed, speaking with are the people that that have to make everything analytics versus eye test dichotomy. And here's the thing about basketball, man. And I know you're a basketball geek yourself, and if you can't handle some barbs or you can't handle a little bit of ribbing, sorry, go play tiddlywinks. If you can't handle a little bit of good natured ribbing, if you can't handle being challenged, well, there's different sports for you. Because this is a very intense sport. This is a very vulnerable sport, and sometimes you get dunked on. Sometimes you don't dunk on somebody. Sometimes you get dunked on. You got to kind of handle the aspects of the culture, even if it isn't always aligned in the way you want to. But I've generally found that the eye test and analytics thing is a false dichotomy pushed by those who are only proficient in one aspect. And like a lot of those guys who kind of get grouped in the eye test side of things, they can utilize the numbers. They choose in most cases not to, but they're probably closer to the middle than the guys who are shouting them down on the analytics side. And that's something that I don't know how to go about fixing or anything like that. But I've generally found you can find common ground with pretty much every good faith actor. It's the bad faith actors you have to watch out for.
By the way, and I don't know how to express this sometimes, because sometimes it seems to me that this is an easy thing to. I know that you deal with it, and I'm probably saying something that's really stupid, but a lot of times the eyeball test, if I see LeBron James, I can say he's a good The analytics also tell me LeBron James is a really good basketball player. So even these players that you go, oh, I can watch him play, and say, well, the analytics a lot of times will tell you a lot of what you're seeing is also the case, right? I mean, it's not.
I think the frustrations for the eye test people come when the analytics are wrong. There's definitely this perception that our community doesn't own up to it. I think back to a conversation that I had where, a gentleman that I didn't know at the time, Dion Lee, who's a longtime skills trainer in Kentucky, he's posting stuff about how he believes that guys can shoot 55 to 60% from the mid range, and my gut reaction was like, you're wrong. So I made a quote tweet, and I there's no real nice way to say it. I attacked him. I attacked his premise. And him and I went back and forth a little bit, and then I kind of realized as we're having a conversation that he's not talking about in the overall. He's got actually a pretty nuanced opinion on this, and so I reached out to him and I mentioned hey man, we got mutual friends on both sides of this, and I just want to have a conversation with you so I can learn more about what you do in your skills training. And then I get on the conversation with him. The next thing I know, we're agreeing about like 95% of the stuff he's saying because. One of the teams I worked with, St. Thomas, with Coach Chow, where we actually, the year that I was very heavily involved with the school, we led all Division III teams in our points per possession from the mid range, and we did it in part because I had a criteria that I pushed for with the team where we were a great 3-point shooting team, we were a great finishing at the rim team, but under certain circumstances, we invited mid range shots, and this criteria was very hard to reach by design. Because I didn't want these guys firing, and we were able to get up to I think it was like 53% for the year, something like that, on those shots. And it's funny is at the end of my whole conversation centered around D'Angelo Russell, where D'Angelo has been working with him for years, like since D'Angelo was in middle school, and D'Angelo at this time was shooting like 55% on certain mid-range attempts, and D'Angelo was like, what are you going to do if at the end of the year D'Ang's above 50%? And I was like, I'm going to follow my sword, and I'm going to say that congratulations, and you guys figured it out. And lo and behold, D'Angelo Russell finished about 50%. So I made it. Deanne didn't even have to prompt me. I drew up. I grabbed our old conversation. I quote tweeted. I'm like, yo, I was wrong. And frankly, I'm not sure if this is going to continue to happen. But he called his shot to some degree here. And in the conversations I have with him, he has a very nuanced opinion on these attempts. So. If you're going to listen to somebody, don't listen to the guy who's just saying the mid-range isn't dead. Listen to the guy who said, I've shown the mid-range isn't dead in these patients over here, and there's an approach to it that I believe works for other people. So, there's definitely a give and take on that front because, no one system of evaluation is ever going to be 100% correct. If I'm correct on 60% of my forecasting takes that I have no control over, I don't have a relationship with the player, I'm just forecasting my best guess, I feel pretty good about myself. Obviously that number goes up if I'm working with them because I have a little more control over the outcome at that point. But I think it's just one of those things where people are so quick to forget, the flaws of analytics, and they hide behind the aggregate numbers. Where a great example this year was Cam Reddish, where Cam Reddish comes out and he's in my opinion basically a prep to pro player because of what happened his season at Duke. And I was at the GERD camp this year, so I was able to watch Cam up close, and I was able to be around him for 3 days, and I found myself liking the kid, and I was rooting for him on that front alone. And he gets off that rocky start, and everyone starts piling on him, and I'm like, okay, are his numbers great? No. Are they good? No, they're bad. His numbers are bad. But we need to go historically and look for some precedent here, because Cam Rush doesn't have Kevin Durant's body, but Kevin Durant shot like 30% from three his first year. Paul George couldn't hit the broadside of the barn for like the first like 2 or 3 months of his career. And I was quick to point out that when people are pointing to like these stats they're supposed to be predictive, which are at times of dubious predictive nature, or even the predictive ones, they're archetypes of players who fall through the cracks. And it didn't mean that Cam was guaranteed to improve rapidly like he did. But I point out, even when he was playing terrible, I'm like, this is a long, athletic kid. He had a very rough experience at Duke, where he probably didn't develop in the way that most college players are. He then is drafted to a team that is not winning a lot of games, and he's asked to play a role that's greater beyond his abilities. It follows that his numbers would not be great. And if we're looking for how analytics can be improved, we gotta be mindful of these cases where athletic, young, explosive players can fall through the cracks. And so people were giving me flack for it, but I'm like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but we need to be prepared for a world where Cam Reddish is a good basketball player, and lo and behold, he looks like he's on his way. And I couldn't be happier for him. He's a nice kid.
All right, visiting with COO of EPLAY University, EPLAY on the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. He's Joe Gill. I'm your host, Jamie Horton. Before we go, Joe, I just want to tell the folks a little bit about EPLAY University, how they can find out more information, what the ultimate goal here, because I think something I've learned from listening to you is that when we just sit down and talk to each other, Joe, I think we can all kind of figure out that we all want the same goal. We all want, as basketball fans, as basketball coaches, as basketball people, we all just want to see the best product that we can see. And I believe analytics helps. You believe analytics helps. But just talking to each other about it, I think that's the goal here. Let's all talk about it. Let's just get together and talk.
Yeah. Let's talk about it without trying to angle the discussion in any direction. Let's just have a conversation, because so much angling undermines these conversations, where it feels like I've had talks with people on both sides where it's like, you're just waiting for me to slip up, and then you're gonna bring this up in a tweet 6 months from now, and I don't want to deal with that. You can do your own thing. I'm not going to be in your world then.
So where can we point people for EPLAY? If you got a website, or where we got a place we can talk to, or where can they find you on social media if they wanted to ask you directly? Could they do that?
I was going to say, I mean, one of the great things about being in a word of mouth industry is that I don't need a website. And frankly, and people follow me on Twitter, they already know that I can be a little bit, not grouchy, but at a certain point, my time for the day runs out, and I become a meaner person. But you can find me on Twitter at Joseph Gill, MA. EPLAY is not quite ready to roll out yet. We're very hopeful in the timeline for that, where we're gonna be pushing it when it does come out, and you'll be hearing from that Twitter account. Once we're wrapping stuff up, and we'll definitely keep you in the loop on that. And there really isn't much more concrete to say. I'm plugging away at it, and it's very hard to it gives me a great respect for Dean Oliver with Basketball on Paper, where he very concisely and eloquently put stuff that was not, he didn't have databases where he could go through and he could just, go to Wikipedia and read up about these concepts. He had to pull it all together, and he put it all together, and the book is incredible. And it's a book that shows you how to think analytically, even if the processes have now been eclipsed by technology. It still stands, up as a great testament to how to think about statistics in sports. So, that's kind of what I'm going for. And at times that can be a slog, but I'm excited to bring it to market, and I know that everybody else here is too. And once it's ready to go, people are gonna know about it.
Well, I know it's, man. I'm excited to have you as part of the EPLAY family and get a chance to learn from people like you, because I am still just a guy that can, sit there on Twitter and everything else and talk trash with people. I can do that, but now I have somebody who can help me back it up with numbers. That's another great thing about this. So the Numbers Tell Your Story podcast, again, we invite you guys to stick around. We're going to have a lot of great content like this as we try to teach you about the world of analytics, how to apply this stuff, why it's important, and why as basketball fans we should get behind this stuff if we want to see a better product on the floor. Joe Gill, COO, EPLAY University. Thanks so much, my brother. I appreciate it. Stay safe up there in Minnesota, man. Let's get through this COVID-19, and I'll see you on the other side.
Sounds great.
All right, brother. Thanks so much.
Yep. Got it?
Yeah, we're good. Sorry about that. I picked the wrong thing. He'll stay with us on the other side. Hey, that's going to do it for us. The Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Thanks again, Joe Gill, the COO of EPLAY University. I'm Jamie Horton. We hope to catch you guys on the other side of this, and we have plenty more of these coming your way. So stay tuned. EPLAY, Numbers Tell Your Story.